Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and the future of our species and all other species on the planet. I'm going to start with, well, what should be good news. This is from climateliabilitynews.org. Never heard of this site. The headline is Coal Company Responds to Investors and Vows to Cut Production to Battle Climate Change. Well, vows are nice. But as we all know, vows, as like promises, are easily said and sometimes not always followed through on. One of the world's largest mining and natural resource companies announced it will limit coal production to reduce carbon emissions in response to investors who pushed the company to commit to a transition to a low carbon economy. Glencore, a multinational mining company based in Switzerland, announced its plans after discussions with institutional investors participating in Climate Action 100 Plus, a group with more than $32 trillion in assets under management. Investors praised Glencore's commitment to low carbon transition. Investors praised Glencore's commitment to a low carbon transition and hailed it as a first for the mining industry. We are encouraged to see that Glencore has taken the positive steps to align its business strategy with the goals laid out by the Paris Agreement to limit global temperature rise and to achieve net zero emissions, said Mindy Lubber, vice chair of the Global Climate Action 100 Plus Steering Committee and chief executive of Ceres, a nonprofit dedicated to sustaining sustainable investing. As the first mining company to make such a commitment, we are hopeful that others in the sector and other high-emitting sectors across the economy will follow suit. Glencore said it plans to limit its coal production capacity broadly to current levels while prioritizing commodities like copper, nickel, cobalt, vanadium, and zinc that it says are essential to the energy and mobility transition. I don't know. That's very mixed reviews in my mind already about this. But anyways, last year, Glencore produced more than 129 million tons of coal. It operates 26 mines across Australia, Colombia, and South Africa. 16 of its mines are in Australia. They remain profitable, and Glencore says it plans to continue coal mining in Australia for at least the next 15 years. All right, well. But a judge in New South Wales recently struck down a proposed coal mine based on its detrimental impacts on climate change and on the surrounding community. That decision could lead to legal challenges for other coal operators and fossil fuel projects in that country. This is actually, so I'm not going to read any more of this. I'm going to link it below. That's important. It would be great if we had more judges who had a conscience and were able to see the dangers of climate change and rule accordingly. Obviously, there's quite a few lawsuits globally around climate change, and they need the courts' help and the judges' backing in order to actually make any impact, I guess. The good thing. So here's the thing. I want to backtrack and say. This dog is trying to mess up my whole broadcast. I like to do these videos with the door open and the sunshine coming in, and I don't know, it just feels better to me. But often I have to close the door because my dog just wants to chew my face and everything else in the studio. So what I was trying to say was the thing about the TPPs, so one of the few things that I could look at that Trump has done that I really, really appreciate is that he pulled us out of the TPP. And this had global and so many implications for the future of the planet, because the TPP was going to allow corporations broader powers in suing nation states for losses, due to future, future revenue. It was going to give corporations this huge amount of power and control over what individual countries could do to protect themselves from the corporations, and obviously from potentially hazardous activities from the corporations. It was going to be a big fat mess. So I have to on this instance give it up to Trump for pulling us out of that, because Obama was dead all for it, and Hillary Clinton was definitely all for it. And I've heard that somebody said that Bernie Sanders was for it, but it doesn't make any sense to me, because I'll have to look that up and see if that's actually true. It was a bad deal all around. Anyways, so this is good that Australia is able to, rule against this mining company, and this needs to happen more and more. They just need to be shut down and shut out. Moving on to this article from a blog called Resource Insights. Independent commentary on environmental and natural resource news by Kurt Cobb. Which species are we sure we can survive without is the title of this article. This is from February 17th, 2019. 2 years ago, I asked the question in the title of this piece. Now comes a wide-ranging study that suggests we are about to test that question in a major way. The study predicts that at a current rate of loss of insect species, 40% could be gone in the next few decades. What is particularly alarming is that this could trigger wide-ranging cascading effects within several of the world's ecosystems. That means that many other life forms, including other animals and plants, could find themselves without what they need to survive in this dangerous game of musical chairs orchestrated by humans. Might we be one of those species? Insects do much of the crop pollination necessary for food production. A list of crops pollinated by bees is quite long. Humans could survive without these foods, but the nutrition and variety in our diets would be severely limited. And yet there is a greater problem. Outside of agriculture, 80 to 90% of plant species require animal pollination. That's quite a few, 80 to 95%. Since those plants are the base of every food chain, catastrophic declines in insect populations could lead to a collapse of existing ecosystems. The exact scope and effects of such a collapse cannot be fully anticipated, but it is doubtful humans would be unharmed. Human civilization uses an enormous amount of free eco-services, that is, services provided by nature, including the purification of water, the formation of soil, the regulation of climate, and energy resources such as hydropower and biomass. However one values these services, the value is enormous. If humans had to pay for these services, that is, if we had to set up mechanical and chemical substitutes, we would never be able to afford it. But we probably wouldn't be able to set up substitute systems that work as precisely and as effectively as nature's. For the last 600 million years, oxygen levels have been kept in a range friendly to life by the almost perfect balance synchronization of the sulfur and carbon cycles mediated by life processes. Right now, we are interfering with the carbon cycle in a major way that is affecting climate. While it doesn't seem to be affecting oxygen levels much, our actions do threaten the stability of modern technical civilization, which grew up in an era of mild climate fluctuations. It has taken a long time to begin to understand the sulfur and carbon cycles, and to understand the origins and full ramifications of climate change. Do we believe that we can understand in short order both the ramifications of the vast loss of species among insects and practically every other class of living organisms? Do we believe we can then come up with a response that will protect us from major reductions in our food supply or in the eco-services mentioned above? The best response would be to stop doing these things, the consequences of which would be grave and about which we understand very little. So far, it appears that we as a human community will continue to be as careless about our own survival as we have been about the survival of the species that surround us. Good stuff. Good article. Short and to the point. And what are, as these species disappear, what are we going to do? What's happening what's happening in our neck of the woods and what I hear in other places, like I read a story a few weeks ago about polar bears infiltrating or overrunning some towns in Russia. Uh, we have a lot of wildlife in this. I live near the mountains, and quite a few of my friends also live near the mountains. And what they're reporting is that there's a lot of wildlife coming down from the mountains: bears, coyotes, mountain lions. Although not many people see too many mountain lions. What else is coming down? Deer. We just have, and right in my neighborhood alone, there's raccoons, possums, all kinds of skunks, all kinds of like wild animals in the area. um, they're obviously looking for food. They're obviously running out of their own food sources, most likely because of climate change. To put it bluntly, there is a definite insect decrease in population here, as in there all over the world, as the same thing is happening. And obviously this is affecting a lot of animals. It's because of the food chain is being altered. And we will probably likely see more of this in the future. I'm going to move on to a very concerning story from NPR. Did Robin send me this? I don't know who sent me this. And this is from from NPR. The title is "Massive Loss of Thousands of Hives Afflict Orchard Growers and Beekeepers." This is from February 18th. So we already know that bee colonies are in danger and are having large problems. And here in 2019, again, another massive loss of bees. They really try to put a very upbeat spin on this story. I don't know why. I don't know why they wouldn't be a little more negative about this. The way they wrap it up, I just didn't enjoy, because they're like, but it's fine. Anyways, almond bloom comes early all at once in California, a flush of delicate pale blooms that unfold around Valentine's Day, and beekeeper Brett 80 is hustling to get his hives ready, working through them on a Central Valley ranch before placing them in orchards. He definitely taps open a hive. We're going to open this up and you're going to see a whole lot of bees in here, 80 says. Under the lid, the exposed, sleepy occupants hum away. He uses a handheld smoker to keep them calm and huddled around their queen. This third-generation beekeeper works night and day with a crew of more than 35. 80 has been busy staging more than 100 semi-truckloads of his honeybee hives and almond orchards over a 200-mile swath of the Central Valley. When temperatures rise and the blooms open, his bees wake up and go to work. It's his hive's first yearly stop on a 6,500-mile tour across the nation. That is incredibly intensive, energy intensive, to just haul these bees all around the country. That right there should probably cause an eyebrow or two to raise. But this almond bloom 80 is scrambling more than usual. Dead outs. 80 lost more than half of his hives over the winter, 50,000, and he's not alone. In September, I thought we had the most awesome bees ever, 80 says. The bees looked incredibly good. Like 80, many beekeepers across the U.S. have lost half of their hives. They call one with no live bees inside a dead out. Some beekeepers lost as many as 80%. That's unusual. And many of the hives that did survive aren't strong in numbers. For decades, 80 says if he lost 5%, he really got nervous. 5%. Now, a 40% loss every few years is more common, he says. But this many lost hives across the country is concerning. What's the next step up from nervous? If 5% means nervous, what does 40% mean? Or 80%? Sheer absolute screaming terror? No, not at all. Well, that's fine. Every hive. California almond orchards have grown so much over the past 10 years, the bloom requires nearly every commercial hive available in the United States. Are we are we at the limit of our resources yet, or what? If we require every single hive available in the United States. That sounds like not a good situation. Almonds have grown from 765,000 acres to 1.33 million acres in the last decade. Bees travel from as far as Florida and New York to do the job. Without these hives, there is no harvest. Around bloom, almond bloom is just as important to the beekeepers. It's a chance to make nearly half their yearly income and a place for the bees to work and grow in early in spring while healing up from the winter. This year, many beekeepers have had to tell their orchardists that they won't have enough bees this year to cover their entire contracts. Many. And some orchardists are desperately calling beekeepers. Some report pollination prices going up. Experts say honeybees are dealing with many stressors, chemicals, loss of wildflowers, climate change, nutrition, and viruses. But this year, a special problem might have taken down the honeybees more than usual. This is actually, we've seen this before, and they already know about this. A tiny parasite called the varroa mite sucks at the bee's body, causing big problems. Ramesh Sagili, a bee expert with Oregon State University, predicted these big bee losses because of mites early last year. It's a very lethal parasite on honeybees, Sagili says, or Sagili. It causes significant damage not only to the bee, but to the entire colony. A colony might be decimated in months if this varroa mite isn't taken care of. He says unusually early and warm spring weather last year made the bees start rearing baby bees early. That gave varroa mites a chance to breed and to multiply too. Varroa mothers crawl into the cells of baby bees and hide there until the bees close the cell up with wax. Then they lay an egg and rear their young on the baby bee. Emotional sting. When the almond blooms fade, beekeepers will truck their hives across America from the Northwest and Dakotas to the South and Maine, chasing spring. In Eric Olson's foggy and frosty Washington State cherry orchard, bloom is still a while off. His crew is busy pruning away the wood that would block light to the fresh fruit. He helps manage one of the largest beekeeping businesses in the Northwest. He says their hives experienced a dramatic loss this year, but it's not as bad as when he lost about 65% of them. That's when I cried, said Olson, who served 20 years in the Air Force. I was a pilot and I spent my time in combat situations. Never in my life was I as low as when we lost 65% of those bees. Chasing spring. Still, spokespeople for the almond industry are saying it's all fine. Orchard growers who have long-standing relationships with beekeepers are not experiencing problems. Really, said Bob Curtis, a consultant for the Almond Board of California. The Almond Board of California. Everything's great. Thanks, Bob Curtis. Folks that are having trouble are the ones that don't make contracts in fall with beekeepers. So if you're, he's blaming it on people who are lazy or, not timely. That's what you get. If Northwest growers line up beekeepers early, Olson says he expects there will be enough bees for the region's smaller fruit tree bloom. Still, he's worried for his orchardist friends. If I can't get bees in my orchard, I'm in trouble, Olson said. I don't have a crop. What do I do? I don't know. All right, nice spin, Bob Curtis. Surveys later this spring will give a better idea of nationwide bee losses, but that might be too late for orchardists at the end of the pollination line. That's the end of that. That's not good news. And I would say that was really shoddy reporting on NPR's part. Just super like, okie dokie. I don't know. Perhaps just a little more fear might be a good component of that article. We have already experienced major insect loss, major pollinator loss, major butterfly loss, major bee loss. and they're just, you know, talking about it like, you know, that's, everything's fine, it's just business as usual. There's just people trucking bees all over the whole of the United States in order to keep whatever industry is going, as if that doesn't sound like an uh, untenable and unwieldy situation in itself. Like non-good. We're going to move on to the last thing I wanted to cover today. This is from peoplesworld.org. I guess this could be mostly the blog post edition of Black Bear News. Militarization and interference in affairs of others impedes Green New Deal. Fighting for a Green New Deal in the United States will require uniting all popular forces against the main barriers to social and ecological progress. The Sunrise Movement, which has brought the Green New Deal to the forefront of conversations about the environment, has identified fossil fuel interests as a main barrier to a green economy. You don't say. Leaders like Aru Shiny Ajay have rightly noted that solving climate issues will require transforming our agriculture, transport, and energy systems and massively investing in communities hit first and worst. In order to overcome the stranglehold of fossil fuel interests over the political system, we need to understand how the military weapons and fossil fuel industries are intertwined. The fight for a green economy and the struggle for peace are inseparable. Since all human beings live on the same planet, the struggle for environmental justice is fundamentally international in scope. The number one target of the environmental movement needs to be the U.S. military machine. Bang on. And the interest it represents. Why? The U.S. military is the number one consumer of fossil fuels. Well documented. The oil consumed by the Department of Defense in its endless wars fought to control other nations' oil deposits and pipelines. That's why we're doing what we're doing in Venezuela. Straight up. We want their oil, and it's barely masked. Trump has pretty much just straight out said they have a lot of oil and we need to go get it. It's what's also funny is, you know, the U.S. military is the largest consumer of fossil fuels, is out fighting all these wars so they can get the oil, so they can keep the military machine going, so they can go out and fight wars to get the oil to keep the military machine going. You see the situation. The oil consumed by the Department of Defense in its endless wars fought to control other nations' oil deposits and pipelines is the single largest contributing factor to worldwide carbon emissions. The Pentagon has also laced the groundwater and soil along the Potomac River with a host of explosive metals, solvent wastes, and hazardous chemicals. U.S. wars and interventions and the more than 800 foreign military bases maintained by the U.S. in at least 80 countries around the world are also massively destructive to our planet's soil and water, other nations' infrastructure, and countless millions of human lives. The U.S.-backed war in Yemen has destroyed that country's water and health infrastructure, generating famine and a serious cholera epidemic. This is a prime example of the close relationship between problems of war, environment, health, and infrastructure. Agriculture is also seriously affected. The U.S. Navy has still not cleaned up years of military waste produced by a bombing range and military bases in Vieques, Puerto Rico, including napalm, Agent Orange, depleted uranium, triacetyl phosphate, and other toxic waste. Farmers working and children playing in the fields of Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, and the DPRK or North Korea continue to be maimed and killed by unexploded bombs still buried in the soil from Vietnam and Korean wars. The napalm and Agent Orange that was spread across these nations continue to result in extremely serious birth defects. The U.S. military raids more than half of the public's discretionary budget every year. Trump requested a whopping $686.1 billion for 2019. That's just on the books. That's not counting the other stuff. Combined with other national security departments, over $1 trillion is sucked up annually. This is money that will be needed to build a green energy national infrastructure, as well as schools, libraries, homes, grocery stores, community centers, hospitals, high-speed trains, and to fund family-sustaining living wage salaries for the people who will plant trees and vegetables, reap the harvest, and generally build the new green economy that we also desperately need. What we need is less economy, by the way. We can debate this whole, the infrastructure thing, but, you know, like the fossil fuel industry, the weapons industry extends its tentacles deeply in the U.S. economy. A New York Times article estimated in 2017 that roughly 10% of the 2.2 trillion in factory output in the United States goes into the production of weapons. Oh joy. Workers employed in the weapons and fossil fuel industries will need to be retrained and hired for jobs that will put the U.S. on the path toward peace and sustainable development. The same goes for vast numbers of people employed by the U.S. law enforcement systems if the Green New Deal is to replace racist police brutality and mass incarceration with proper investments into oppressed communities. Fully behind that. Weapons manufacturers, crude oil fracking and coal mining companies, oil refineries, coal and oil burning energy plants, as well as their investors and supply chain manufacturers, which even exploit slave labor in U.S. prisons, are not the only beneficiaries of the U.S. military machine. They are only the tip of the spear. Just the tip. Transnational corporations in agriculture, mining, and other industries also benefit from the U.S. military through threats of invasion, U.S.-backed coups, and various methods of foreign interference. The objective is to control other countries' national resources. These transnational corporations are also tremendously damaging to the planet's environment and have worked to set up right-wing regimes that will maximize their profits. Oh, how we like those right-wing regimes. Right-wing coups in Honduras and other parts of Latin America and the Caribbean have been conducted on behalf of the U.S.-based monopolies like Chiquita, Dole, and Del Monte. They rested on the formation of death squads with support from these agro-monopoly interests. Today, the Bolsonaro government in Brazil is bulldozing large portions of the Amazon forest, resulting in the displacement of indigenous communities. The U.S. government doesn't have any problems with Bolsonaro, right? None at all. He's fine. He's fine by us. Without tackling the problem of U.S. transnational corporations and their role internationally, the Green New Deal could easily descend into a race for control of the planet's lithium deposits, which cannot be mined forever. Well, and this is the crux of, replacing our infrastructure with, or replacing our car manufacturing base, or whatever, with all the precious metals that are needed to run all this new technology. We don't need to replace the infrastructure. We need to get rid of the infrastructure and learn how to live without it. That should be the crux of the Green New Deal. We should give away homes, land, food, transform the military into a peacekeeping, climate change force, and basically help people, train them to grow food and to live sustainably. And also the military could be used to actually keep people from, doing bad things, like, having some, I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of like black market technology and people trying to still, create industrial type products, even if they're outlawed, or even if we say you can't do that. Obviously, lots of this is going to happen. Also, you're going to have to keep people from poaching. You're going to have to keep people from, destroying the landscape, destroying the ecosystem, because that's what people like to do. So maybe we turn that law enforcement into, keeping people from doing crazy stuff. Maybe setting up no-go zones for wilderness areas and keeping people the hell out. Let's move on. Without tackling the problem of U.S. transnational corporations and their role internationally, the Green New Deal, okay, I already read that, an alternative that some countries have proposed in cooperation on an international energy grid. This could be more evenly distribute solar, wind, and other sustainable sources of electrical power, reducing individual countries' reliance on battery production. Cooperation on infrastructure projects like this would be in line with the Green New Deal resolution, which demands international exchange of technology, expertise, products, funding, and services. Helping other countries achieve a Green New Deal is the resolution demand as the resolution demands with no strings attached and in cooperation with the global community of nations that would constitute just reparations. Let me read this sentence again. In cooperation with the global community of nations would constitute just reparations for centuries of exploitation and oppression. A united front against all anti-planet forces in the U.S. will be much stronger if it links up with working and oppressed people of other nations who have already been engaged for centuries in struggle against these very same interests. Anti-planet forces. I mean, our entire country is built on anti-planet forces. Can we take those down from within? Some say maybe not. The Green New Deal resolution, sponsored by New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, demands prioritizing the needs of frontline and vulnerable communities in the U.S. This includes indigenous people, communities of color, migrant communities, deindustrialized communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, low-income workers, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and youth. Shanae Ajay said it is a solution that meets the twin crisis of climate change and growing racial and economic inequality and is actually in line with what science and justice demand. Redressing centuries of structural racism in the United States is an important central component of the Green New Deal. The same ideology of racism that has been used to dehumanize Africans, Native Americans, and Chicano and Chicanx and to justify slavery, genocide, and massive land theft continues to be used to justify voter suppression, segregation, mass incarceration, slave labor conditions, police brutality, and underemployment, homelessness, underinvestments in poor and working class communities of color, and to conduct assaults on the social services that benefit all U.S. people. The profit seekers that have promoted this racism are international players, and they promote the same racism on an international level. It is the same racism that has been used to excuse centuries of colonialism and imperialism in African countries. It is the same racism that dehumanizes the people of Latin and Caribbean states, Polynesians, the people of the Asian continent, including people of Arab and Middle Eastern descent. Racism is used to suggest that the people of the global south are incapable of national sovereignty and economic development, ding, 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 or of developing their own systems of democracy based on their own unique national conditions, cultural traditions, and histories of grassroots struggle. Blah. Racism is used to gaslight oppressed nations that struggle to develop under the weight of U.S. imposed sanctions. See Venezuela, or Iraq, or Iran, or North Korea, or any of the other countries that we completely screw over. This ideology of racism is supplemented with demonization campaigns against any foreign leader that stands in the way of the financial interests of U.S. transnational corporations. Ding, ding, ding. These campaigns are used to build up support for socially and ecologically devastating wars and interventions that further raid the U.S. people's public budget. Regime change operations also frequently ignore the perspectives. How long is this article? Keeps going. Regime change operations also frequently ignore the perspectives of working class people of color in their own countries. Efforts to demonize the Maduro administration in Venezuela, for example, usually hide the fact that the opposition is mainly based in whiter, wealthier neighborhoods. They ignore that the opposition includes owners of agricultural corporations descended from the colonial planter class, and they silence the mestizo working people and campesinos who are overwhelmingly Chavistas and Maduro supporters. And this is an important part of the Chavista movement, is that it has given more equality and rights to mestizo and campesinos and people of more African descent. Yeah. The racism of war is the same racism that dehumanizes immigrants fleeing regions of the world suffering from social and ecological destruction created by U.S. monopoly interests. When immigrants come to the U.S. from these parts of the world, racism is used to super exploit their labor with sub-minimum wages while refusing to allow them access to citizenship. Man, hitting a lot of good buttons right here. This contributes to a huge and growing pool of super exploited workers barred from the ballot box. greatly strengthening the ultra-right Republican Party. It also suppresses the negotiating power of all workers, including white workers. To fight for their interests, the people of the United States need to understand how the U.S. military machine and the profit interests it represents is the main barrier to social and environmental progress. This can form the basis for strong international solidarity with working and oppressed people around the world in their struggle against U.S. imperialism. This solidarity is already developing. During the Ferguson protests, Palestinians in their struggle against apartheid genocide for national self-determination made concrete links with activists in the Black Lives Matter movement to share strategies and tactics. The links were not coincidental. A major campaign of Jewish Voices for Peace is to end the deadly exchange program, whereby U.S. law enforcement officials, including police officers and ICE officials, train in Israel with Israeli police and security agencies that are documented human rights violators. Wow, I didn't know that. At the same time, Israeli weapons manufacturers test their products on Palestinians and are then able to sell them as combat proven. Isn't that convenient? Progressive forces around the world can be encouraged by the fact that some leading backers of the Green New Deal resolution, like Ocasio-Cortez, California Representative Ro Khanna, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, and Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar have co-sponsored the Green New Deal resolution or supported a select committee to write Green New Deal legislation while also siding with the United Nations and the majority of nations in opposing Trump's coup in Venezuela, which holds the world's largest oil deposits beside many other natural resources. These are positive steps toward a rational and humane approach to solving global problems, but cooperation and solidarity with working and oppressed people around the world need to be greatly strengthened. I had to read the whole thing because it was really good. Yeah, and I just wanted to say this is the reason why Tulsi Gabbard is being smeared and why she's absolutely being clamped down on, because she is the most anti-military voice in the field of candidates for the 2020 Democratic election, national race for the 2020 election. Bernie Sanders is already being smeared, of course, but I think most of the candidates are only timidly opposed to all the military regime change, all the conflicts around the world. But Tulsi Gabbard has been the most outspoken in ending, and she's a veteran, a combat veteran, but she's saying that we need to just completely overhaul our thinking about what it is we're doing in the world. So she is the most anti-military voice, and I really find that view very refreshing, and the fact that she's being completely pushed out of the conversation. She's not even mentioned in this article, which with other candidates or other politicians, which I find very strange. I also heard the other day they talked about all the Democratic candidates that were out hustling all over the United States, all out campaigning or whatever, stumping. They listed every single candidate but Tulsi Gabbard. They just left her name out. This is by design. They really, really don't want Tulsi Gabbard anywhere near a podium, anywhere near a stage. So she's right up there with Bernie Sanders, as far as Bernie Sanders just can't be ignored this time. That's the problem. He's too well known, so they have to talk about him. But they're really trying to shut Tulsi Gabbard down. So if you have a chance to become familiar with her and her message, I really advise that you do that. And she's also for everything else that most of the Democrats are for, healthcare, universal healthcare, free college. She definitely backs the Green New Deal. She's for everything else. She's just super anti-regime change and anti-military. So they don't want her talking or speaking or being heard or being listened to or being seen on Facebook. And they don't want her anywhere near anybody. So support her if you can. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.